Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Nora Ellison, 68, retired school librarian widow. I did not buy the sea. I bought a small square of silence beside it. The deed said Lot 7 Cliff Road, but I called it breath. On the first afternoon in the house, the wind moved through the sheer curtains as if the glass had never been invented. I set a framed photograph of Victor, his grin slanting, his tie crooked from some long-ago wedding, on the mantel, and uncorked a modest bottle of red. One glass, no speech. Just the slow relief that arrives when no one needs anything. The room smelled of paint and cedar. The floors were honeyed maple, still unscuffed, almost shy. From the balcony, the coastline lay like a sentence written without hurry, bluffs tied, a strip of road pinned to the hill. The realtor had called it an oceanfront villa. I called it a room with a horizon where my lungs finally understood their job. I lifted the glass to the photograph. "You would have liked this, Vic," I said, almost a whisper. The words steadied me, then vanished into the hiss of the surf. I stood there counting the invisible minutes you collect after you've lived too long in other people's calendars. The phone rang. The sound cut clean, a hard line through velvet. I expected a neighbor, perhaps the woman I'd seen earlier trimming roses next door. Instead, a male voice, brisk and polished, came on like a foreman giving orders. "Aunt Nora," said Caleb Shore. Not nephew by blood, my late daughter's husband, but he used the title the way a man uses a key. "We're on the way. 15 people, towels, bedding, slippers. We'll stay 3 weeks. We'll reach you in 40 minutes. Leave the gate open." He didn't wait for an answer. The click landed like a stamp. I stood with the receiver cooling in my hand, the ocean still moving like nothing had happened. 15. The number bloomed absurd and heavy at once. The glass trembled against my palm. I set it down before I spilled it on the first day of my own floor. I walked the perimeter of the living room, touching the edges I'd chosen, open shelves for books, a simple table, a rug the color of oat straw. The place felt newly born, and I felt newly born in it. I thought of the years of careful saving, the nights I ate soup so I could keep the dream from thinning the small envelope labeled Shore I carried in my dresser for a decade. I thought of my daughter Emily gone now, of the way Caleb's promises used to come wrapped in certainty. All of that moved through me in a quiet, tidal way. 40 minutes. I measured them not by a clock, but by what I could still protect from being immediately turned into a staging ground. I slid Victor's photograph inward on the mantel. I closed the door to the bedroom that held the best of the view. I opened the kitchen drawers, spoons nested like fish knives sleeping in their block, and realized I had put everything away as if someone else would need it. The habit startled me. Outside, the wind lifted, then eased. I breathed along with it. The choice was not whether they would arrive, that had already been decided without me, but how I would meet the arrival. Engines announced themselves before I saw the lights. A black SUV first, then 2 sedans, a white van with roof racks, and a pickup with folding chairs stacked in its bed. Doors thumped. Laughter spooled out into the salt air. Gravel snapped under shoes. The house, which had been a held breath, changed shape. Caleb stepped out last, sunglasses reflecting the water stride set to a tempo he must have practiced. He didn't look at me so much as past me toward the glass wall that framed the horizon. Beside him, Lena, his new wife, glossy hair, a phone already raised, angled for light. "First day at our beach place," she announced to her camera, her tone bright, her smile trained. "Wait till you see the master view." No one rang the bell. My front door had been opened to the breeze, and a line of people crossed the threshold as if a velvet rope had been lifted. A cousin of a cousin rolled a case to the console. A boy in a baseball cap leaned his skateboard against a chair and opened my refrigerator as if auditioning for a commercial. Stainless. "Nice," he said, posing with a bottle of sparkling water while someone snapped a photo. 2 young women swung onto the kitchen stools and began tapping captions. "Tag it, but don't drop the pin," one said. "Vague oceanfront," the other agreed. A man in a fisherman's cap walked to the mantel and rested his forearm along it as if measuring space for his stories. My hand moved without thinking, sliding Victor's frame a few inches deeper where elbows could not breathe on the glass. Across the hedgerow, the neighbor looked over, wide-brimmed hat, watchful smile folded away. She didn't scold, she simply witnessed. Her gaze felt like a sentence with very few words, and all of them accurate. "Unload the big ones," Caleb called, pointing with 2 fingers. "Food to the kitchen, gear by the deck. Lena needs the master for light." He used my rooms as units. He used my air as inventory. I stayed where I was, inside the doorway, back, straight hands easy at my sides. People moved around me like water searching for a seam. A child bounced a beach ball that skittered across the rug I had unrolled that morning. I caught it mid-arc and set it down. The speaker from the pickup found an outlet and began to thud a polite beat, the kind that makes a room feel occupied even while it is being emptied of meaning. Lena drifted down the hall with her phone raised. "Come look," she sang to the screen. "Double sinks, ocean tub. Imagine sunrise yoga here." The word here did more work than any map. Behind her, 2 more women rolled suitcases toward the bedrooms, laughing about windows and closet space they had not paid for, not asked for, but had already pictured as theirs. Caleb followed, a leather duffel swinging. He pressed his palm lightly to my shoulder as he went by, the way you move a curtain. "Don't be difficult, Nora," he said, friendly on the surface management underneath. "You've got the whole house. We'll just take the master. It's the sensible thing." Sensible, the word stuck like a burr. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar from the dresser drawers. I stepped into the frame of the door that opened to the best room, my hand against cool wood. Beyond the window, the water tilted its silver line and unstitched it again, patient as breath. On the nightstand sat another photograph of Victor, smaller, tucked just so, the glass catching a square of light. Lena swung the closet doors wide for her audience. "Perfect," she said. "Our room." The pronoun reached for my throat and found nothing to hold. "No," I said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed. Lena's phone dipped an inch, then rose again, smile recast. Caleb laughed, a sound used like oil on a stuck hinge. "Come on," he said, hand extending past me toward the handle. "We're family. Don't make this awkward. Let her have the light. We'll be quieter in here." Behind him, someone called from the kitchen. "Where do we put the wine?" another voice answered. "Anywhere," and I felt the house absorb the word like a stain. Caleb's fingers touched the latch. I eased the door toward its frame until wood met metal with that small kiss of alignment. I felt the shape of the room settle behind me. "I said no," I repeated. In the kitchen, laughter rose thin and easy. A boy in wet socks slid down the hall, nearly colliding with my hip, offered a breathless sorry, then chased his own echo. Lena's smile grew whiter, brighter, but her eyes looked at the lens as if it owed her something. Caleb leaned close enough that I could count the tiny nicks along his jaw where the razor had skipped. "You're tired," he murmured, softer now, almost gentle. "Don't do this. You have space. We need this room." I kept my hand on the knob and my shoulders square to the doorway. The ocean sound came through the vent, indifferent and steady. Victor's photograph watched the window. The floor was new under my feet. The word I had never managed to say in time finally arrived on schedule and held its place. "No," I said again. Everything after that would have its own shape, its own noise. But in that doorway, the house learned my name, and I learned the doors. Caleb's mouth tilted in that patient way men adopt for furniture that won't slide. "You don't mean that," he said, and the softness in his tone tried to sand the edge off my word. I kept my palm on the knob. The latch kissed the strike again, a small sound that felt like a verdict. Behind him, Lena narrowed her eyes at the screen, calculating where drama might bloom best. Down the hall, a suitcase zipper rasped open. In the kitchen cabinet's clicked drawers sighed a chorus of small trespasses. The polite beat from the speaker became a little bolder, as if the room were being tuned to someone else's pulse. A boy in wet socks skittered past, caught sight of my face, and tried a grin. It died when I didn't offer one back. "Nora," Caleb said, drawing out the vowels, "we're all exhausted. Be reasonable." Reasonable had been the altar on which I'd laid too many offerings. I let the word blow out of me without taking anything with it. "The room stays closed," I said, and my voice felt like it came from the same place as the tide, steady, unafraid of repetition. The neighbor at the hedge lifted a hand just once, a small signal, then let it fall. "Witness, not rescue." My body understood the difference. Lena pivoted the camera so it framed me against the door, as if my refusal could be converted into good content. Some pushback, she chirped lightly into the lens, then made her smile smaller, sweeter. "We'll work it out." A teenager hollered from the patio. "Surf looks clean." A cooler thumped onto my island. Condensation slid in milky trails. Someone propped the sliders wide and salt shouldered its way through the screens. Caleb leaned in, breath cool with mint. "Don't embarrass yourself. You know you've got plenty. Let us use the space that makes sense." He tapped the door as if coaxing a skittish animal. "Light matters for Lena's work." I thought of all the times light had mattered for me, and I had settled for corners. The cedar smell rose like memory. I stepped backward, not away, but deeper into the frame. "This isn't a negotiation." His smile tightened, the edges going papery. He turned to the hall. "Master's off," he announced, clapping to keep authority buoyant. "Figure out the rest." "Lena, we'll take the corner room for now." "Temporarily," she said to her followers, recovering the script with a tilt of her chin. The phone climbed again, lens hungry. "Make the best of it, right?" She signaled 2 young women with her eyes, and they rolled their cases toward a door. I had chosen for quiet guests who might one day ask. In the kitchen, a clatter. Someone had discovered the drawer with linens and pulled dish towels out like party streamers. The white runner I'd laid down that morning bore its first damp crescent, a signature of a cup set without thinking. A man in a fisherman's cap, no relation I could place, rested his hip against the mantel again, measuring his ownership with the map of his body. I slid Victor's frame another inch inward, a motion now practiced. He pretended not to see. The neighbor's hat bobbed once. She turned away, then back, as if to reassure me I wasn't inventing the scale of it. "Where do we stack boards?" someone called from the van. "By the deck," Caleb answered, as if he'd drawn those lines the day the cliff rose from the sea. He passed me with the duffel, the leather brushing my sleeve. "We'll settle in, and then you'll see it was easier this way." I let him go by. The word easier skimmed my skin like a fly. I didn't swat it. I let it tire itself and fall. Noise multiplied. Laughter ricocheted into corners and stuck there. The television came alive beneath a stranger's thumb. Cartoon voices warred with the speaker's bass. A girl spilled soda that made an amber sun on the rug and clapped a hand over her mouth, delighted by the size of the mistake. No one bent to blot it. I added the spot to the growing ledger the house and I were quietly keeping. "Hey," a young man at the island called toward me as if I were staff. "Do you have a bottle opener?" "I have a house," I said. He didn't catch the answer. He'd already turned back to his friend's laughter, making a fence between us. The hall narrowed to Lena's tone loud for the phone, soft for me. "We're grateful we are, it's just look." She held up the screen and rotated the world into 2 dimensions, where any claim could be posed as reality. I did not perform refusal for her. I placed it in the room and let the room learn its shape. When the worst of arriving had settled into the busy work of occupancy, I walked away from the door and into the study, a small room with the promise of books and the stillness of an old oak desk whose drawers slid like breath. I closed the study door until it rested on the latch. It didn't lock houses, this new rarely assumed danger, but the thin seam of separation made air of a different temperature gather around me. I sat. The noise outside dulled a degree, as when a storm turns its face and you understand the shape of it from the way the light changes. My hands, small-veined, not made for wrestling, lay flat. On the side table, a travel frame held Victor younger, his hair dark, his shoulders unburdened by endings. I touched the glass once, not to beg counsel, but to steady the line of my spine. In the quiet, numbers arranged themselves without my permission. Not the 15 now in my kitchen and hall that arithmetic I could do on one hand, while the other held the door, but the long addition of years' tuition, when Caleb's plans outpaced his credit. The bridge for the mortgage, when the bank discovered how past mistakes love to announce themselves at closing. The late-night transfer when a transmission died. The months of deductibles when my daughter got sick and money learned to move like water through our fingers. I hadn't called any of it debt. I had called it help. The difference sat across from me now like a person who had kept his coat on in my living room all afternoon. Outside the study, someone tried the handle. It gave a fraction, then found the latch. Caleb's knuckles met the wood twice polite, the way a knock is polite when the knocker already counts the room as his. "Aunt Nora," he said the title now in service of the tone he needed. "Let's not be dramatic. We'll make this work." He used "we" as a lever. I stayed in my chair and let the lever fail. My phone lay on the desk screen black. I watched my own reflection near the basil, 2 eyes, 1 mouth. A woman older than I remember from the last time I looked with interest and not obligation. The black stayed black until my thumb woke it. The digits appeared as if they had been waiting more patiently than I had 911. I did not count to 3. The operator's voice came steady, built for the edges of panic and the deserts of silence. I told her my name, my address, my relationship to no one in the house, and the tally I could make without standing up. She asked me to confirm the number twice. "At least 15, I said. They entered without permission and refused to leave. "Stay where you are," she said. "Do not engage. Officers are on the way." Engines outside tightened to belt catching. I ended the call and set the phone face down. Its warmth stayed in my palm like the afterimage of a match struck in a dark room. The noise of the house rolled and broke as if trying on a rhythm it would never quite fit. Caleb tried the handle again. "Nora, come on. You know we're family." Words can be scrubbed until they go thin. Family sounded that way, had a chalky taste. I let it dissolve on my tongue and did not swallow. He kept talking through the door, not expecting replies, only shaping the air so his version could later claim to have filled it. He suggested compromises, then implied responsibilities, then floated the word unstable like a paper lantern, designed to drift and be discovered later by witnesses willing to be charmed by how soft the light looks at a distance. When he paused, the quiet sounded like something you could drink. I took it into my lungs and held it there until the next wave of footsteps rose, the shuffle that means people are choosing spaces and the drag that means bags have acquired rights. Time measured itself by smaller things, the clock's second hand, the hiss of the vent, the way dust decides and undecides where to land in a shaft of late light. Then, far off, at first faint as a whistle moving through fog, a siren laid a thread across the afternoon. A murmur began outside the study. The television went low. Someone said, "Uh-oh," half laughing. A boy darted from the hall to the patio and back again, speed telegraphing news. There was a knock at the front door, one that used the whole hand in the architecture of authority. Voices switched registers. Lena's phone fell from its high angle to her lap, then disappeared into a pocket. I opened the study and walked toward the foyer. My floor maple honeyed took my steps as if it had been waiting to learn how my weight moved across it. 2 officers stood framed by the transom's pale glass uniforms, dark faces unbothered by the sight of a house trying to be 2 stories at once. "Ma'am," the woman said. "Officer Reyes." She indicated her partner with a nod. "Officer Hill." Caleb moved in fast with a smile tuned for people who grade goodness by volume. "Officer, so glad you're here," he said. "Bit of a misunderstanding. Long drive, elderly relative, overwhelmed by the move. Give us a minute to settle and we'll be—" Officer Reyes did not look at him. She looked at me. "You're the caller." "Yes," I said, and passed her the folder I had laid on the console beneath the bowl where keys go. Deed. Utility. Closing statement. Hill scanned while Reyes kept her eyes on mine, her questions short and specific. "Do you want these individuals to remain in your home?" "No." She turned her head, not body, and addressed the room. "Folks, gather your belongings. You have 15 minutes to exit the premises. Any refusal after that may result in trespass arrest." The house inhaled. Not silence, something more practical. Motion with an end. Zippers answered first, then buckles. A boy towed his skateboard vertical with a practice snap, misjudged, and let it slap the baseboard. He glanced at me and mumbled sorry, this time with his eyes up. The man in the fisherman's cap lifted the cooler carefully, avoiding the runner like a man who had remembered his manners just 5 minutes too late. 2 women swept sunglasses and chargers into totes with the resigned efficiency of people evacuating a picnic before a storm breaks. Caleb kept his smile at a fixed setting. "We can sort this without a scene," he told Officer Reyes, as if he were offering her a professional courtesy. "She's just tired." Reyes stepped between him and me by half a shoulder. "Sir, this is not a negotiation." Lena approached with lips arranged for sympathy and a handkerchief that managed to look both antique and deliberately chosen. "We drove all day," she told Hill, who did not seem a likely audience for handkerchiefs. "Families should be able to—" "Please stop recording inside the complainant's home," Hill said, looking at the ghost of a red dot that wasn't there anymore. She tucked the phone away as if it had burned her. People flowed in reverse, a film spooling backward. Bags, rolling towels, dripping voices stepping down in volume, because the room was no longer theirs to amplify. Someone muttered that beach houses were overrated, which made a few of them brave enough to laugh again. No one laughed twice. At the door, the boy with the socks now in shoes paused. "Ma'am," he said, "just that the honorific not learned from me or for me, but carried from somewhere not ruined yet." I nodded and he took his place in the small procession out to the drive. The neighbor had returned to the fence, her hands folded. She didn't wave, she didn't need to. I gave her a single nod. She returned it with a gravity that made the exchange feel like a document witnessed and stamped. Lena yanked a zipper closed on a duffel with too much force, then stared at the master door as if it had failed an audition. Caleb adjusted his cufflinks, unnecessary performative, and prolonged the last seconds as if stalling could rewrite a law. Finally, he stood on the threshold and turned the charm up one notch past believable. "We'll talk," he said to the room in general, but the room did not hold an audience for him anymore. "People will have opinions." "I imagine they will," I said, and the evenness of my voice surprised me by how little work it required. It arrived and I let it stand. Engines restarted. The convoy moved with all the dignity gravel allows. Red tail lights made commas across the drive, then periods at the road. The house exhaled in stages as if it had lungs in every room. Reyes remained long enough to take a brief statement. Small facts stacked in a neat column. Time of call, number of individuals, identification, verified order to vacate issued and complied with. She handed me a card with a case number and a line in her writing that said, plainly, "Call if they return." No embroidery on the sentence, no warning either. Just the fact of what I could do next time, if next time tried again. When the door closed behind them, the quiet was not pure. It was complicated by the nearness of what had been here. Bottles had made rings. Towels had shed grit. A blush pink smear of lipstick marked the edge of a water glass on the console. The speaker was finally still. The television dark reflected the tall rectangles of the windows like doors waiting to be chosen. I stood in the foyer with my hands at my sides and listened to what remained. The ocean spoke in its old grammar. The house answered it now with a clearer accent. I moved through the rooms like a person walking ashore after weather, not to mourn, not to gloat, simply to see. In the living area, a cushion had been flattened into a valley. I lifted it and let it remember its shape. In the kitchen, I closed the refrigerator carefully, hearing the seal catch and hold a soft vow. The line of water on the runner took a towel and did not argue. In the hall, the spot where soda had blossomed came up under a damp cloth sugar surrendering under small circles. I did not talk to any of it. I didn't need to. The work was not penance, it was reclamation. On the mantel, Victor's frame sat square, now no elbow near. I set 2 fingers to the top edge and straightened it in unnecessary hair. The photo did not change when I did that. I did. The gesture was small, but it belonged to a person whose hands had resumed their authority in her own rooms. The neighbor's gate clicked. The sound traveled across the hedge like a message. I did not go out. I didn't need anything. I held my place where arrival had once dissolved it. The air felt like it would keep me upright without an effort I had come to think it was part of being alive. The clock in the study ticked twice, then a third time. I watched the second hand step forward, confident, consistent, uninterested in witness. My body followed it, pulse finding a rhythm older than argument. On the console, the folder waited, edges aligned. I slid the deed back into its sheath and rested my palm on the paper long enough to borrow its cool. Then I put it away. The drawer made a clean sound, closing a sound I realized I had missed my whole life without knowing its name. In the master, the bedspread showed the ghost of a duffel's weight. I smoothed it with my open hand and felt the fabric's weave claim its pattern again. The cedar smell in the dresser held. The view unoccupied did nothing but what it had always done, change by staying the same. I closed the door gently until it caught. The latch answered with that small, certain kiss. I stayed there a breath longer, palm on the wood, learning the exact give of the hinge, the resistance, the permission. Then I walked back toward the center of the house, which is to say, toward the place where the first refusal had taught the walls my name. The day thinned by degrees. Light lifted from the floorboards and climbed up the windows to the top rail where it stayed a moment before leaving altogether. In the absence, the lamp by the sofa offered enough. I sat. The quiet didn't ask me to entertain it, it simply shared the room. My phone lay on the oak, still warm from earlier. I didn't touch it. The urge to explain to marshal witnesses, to stitch a narrative before other hands could cut one from the fabric that wasn't theirs. That urge rose like a tide, and then as tides do return the sand, without requiring me to say yes or no to its retreat. I listened. Air moved in the ducts. The sea insisted without forcing. My breath aligned. The house, no longer a catalog of features, had earned today's use of the word home without my having to say it aloud. By evening, the house had returned to itself in the way shorelines do, not untouched but recognizable. The runner dried the cushion, sprang back, and the glass on the console stopped wearing someone else's mouth. The quiet had a pulse. I stood in it long enough to know it was real. Then my phone began to shiver. At first, it was a single chime, then a chain. A photograph filled the screen, a younger Emily hugging Caleb light through leaves, her hair caught mid-laugh. Under it, his caption, "My mother-in-law threw us out after a long drive. Money makes some people cruel." Comments stacked while I read strangers scolding an unnamed villain. Cousins far away adding sighs where facts should go. A man I didn't know reminding the feed that family means sharing. A video surfaced next. Lena sat in the passenger seat of an SUV, eyes glossed, voice pitched like a violin string drawn lightly. "We brought towels and food," she said, camera angled for pretty sorrow. "We only wanted time together." She called the police on us. The numbers rose at the corner of the screen, small glimmering proof of attention's heat. I watched long enough to understand tone, not truth, then pressed the side button and let the rectangle go black. The quiet returned to the room like a tide that doesn't ask permission. I didn't answer the messages that followed. "Is it true? Call me." And I didn't write a defense. The house taught my hands different work. I finished the last of the wiping. I stacked glasses with care. I closed the sliders and listened to the seal catch. Every small completion steadied the larger one inside my chest. Morning found me at the study desk with a key in my palm and a metal box on the floor. I hadn't opened the safe since the day I moved in. The combination still knew me. Inside were folders that held all the days I once thought didn't need saving, bank statements, stamped receipts, copies of checks, my own notes dated in the margins. I carried them to the desk, as if each folder had a temperature. They did. I could feel a burn where a sum had been too large, a chill where a promise had lived too long without company. Tuition for Caleb's business degree, when his signature outpaced his means, installments lined up like fence posts across 2 years. The down payment on the bungalow he and Emily called a dream when the lender balked. Emergency repairs when engines died and credit cards panted. The months of copays and uncovered charges when Emily's illness learned the habit of coming back. Amounts I had never stitched together into a whole settled side by side. My pencil sharp counted. The gray column of figures grew until it reached into air near 300,000 when it stood. Once I would have folded it all away again and named it love. The house made a different sound around me now. It didn't argue. It offered a surface. I made copies. I wrote a one-page summary with dates in a neat hand I had kept from the library's checkout desk. I slid everything into a flat folder and drove into town, the road curving along the bluff as if someone had drawn it with a careful wrist. Harris kept his office near the library where I used to shelve returns on Tuesday afternoons. The receptionist looked at the folder and at my face and said, "He has a window." The door to his office opened on a desk with ordered piles. A framed photograph showed him shaking hands with a judge I recognized from a probate hearing years ago. Harris Rowe's hair in that precise gray that makes a person look like he keeps his promises offered a chair and said, "Tell me from the beginning you can hold." I did not give him a saga. I set the folder between us and let paper carry the part of the weight it could. He read slowly as if the ink were still wet. When he reached the page where my pencil had made a column, he looked at me over the top of his glasses and didn't pretend it was nothing. "This is not a misunderstanding," he said, placing his finger beside a date, then another. "This is a pattern." He named the pattern with terms whose edges fit the shape I had drawn without needing to be a lawyer to see it. Unjust enrichment promises made and leaned upon. Promissory estoppel, a line where funds intended for one purpose had been bent to another conversion. He asked for the incident number from the police. I slid the card across the desk. He wrote it neatly at the top of a yellow pad and nodded at the way fingerprints from last night had already begun to form a record. "Defamation too," he said, tapping his pen once. "Screenshots help." I had taken them captioned timestamp count before darkening the phone. I passed them over. He printed copies while I sat with my hands on my knees and watched the quiet method of a person building a bridge. When he turned the monitor for me to read, the draft was spare, cool, factual dates, amounts, transfers, promises, and Caleb's own handwriting from years ago that said, "I'll make you whole when the business clears this quarter," signatures that sloped away from accountability. The language made no claim for my character. It asked the court to look at what stood up by itself. "Filing this afternoon is straightforward," Harris said. "Service will be prompt." He did not promise outcomes. He promised steps. My name appeared at the top of the page in letters that could be read from across a room. I signed where tabs told me to. The pen left a clean trail that dried quickly like it belonged there. By the time the courthouse stamped our complaint, the noise online had learned a new register. A small paper in the county ran a trimmed account of last night's police call. Officers responded to a trespass at a residence on Cliff Road. Occupants vacated upon request. Friends forwarded the link with question marks. Someone posted a clip from Lena's stream and wrote a sentence under it that felt like a hand sliding into a glove made for it. That pronoun R is doing a lot of work. I did not add anything. I did not subtract either. I kept my attention on the file number in the corner of the stamped page. The hearing arrived on a morning with unseasonably clear light. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and paper. Caleb came in wearing a blue tie, the color of confidence. Lena followed in silk that photographed well. She carried a lace handkerchief like a prop a director had approved. Their lawyer was young, keen-eyed, quick with qualifiers. Harris set our exhibits in a neat stack. He did not rehearse out loud. His silence had the feel of someone who had measured his steps with a ruler. The bailiff called order. We stood, then sat. Caleb's attorney rose, first all agreeable vowels. He described me as overwhelmed, grieving, confused, a woman who had misunderstood generosity and responded to fatigue with overreach. He put Lena in a soft frame, a content creator whose livelihood depends on access to light and serenity. He said family life grows messy. He said the police had been invited to a domestic scene and misunderstood a door. Harris rose without adjusting his cuffs. He did not call me anything. He handed the judge the first exhibit, bank transfers from my accounts to Caleb's across 6 years, labeled with notations in my handwriting that matched invoices and requests, tuition, 11th mortgage gap, it's 14, repair, 5 oncology copay, 8-9. He pointed to 2 promissory notes. Caleb's words, his signature promises clear enough to be read without legal training. "These are not gifts," Harris said. "They are obligations acknowledged and avoided." He played a short clip pulled from Lena's broadcast, her voice-buoyant camera sweeping the hallway, the sentence that had felt like a finger on my shoulder first day at our beach place. "Master is perfect for my sunrise video." He paused the frame on the word hour. The judge made no face. He took a note. The opposing attorney objected context, intent, performance. The judge raised a palm. "I can watch," he said, and watched until the moment where my door closed and my mouth formed a word you could read even when you muted the sound. Harris called Mrs. Callahan. She wore a straw hat when she walked in and took it off at the rail, folding the ribbon between careful fingers. Sworn in, she sat with her back straight and described what a person sees from the house next door when 15 people arrive without ringing a bell. She said my name like a person says their own. She remembered what Caleb had called across the hedge unload the big ones, and how my body looked inside the doorway quiet, yes, but not a welcome. The judge asked 2 questions. Mrs. Callahan's answers did not tremble. When she stepped down, she returned the hat to her head with a small nod to no one in particular. Caleb's lawyer attempted to salvage people misspeak. Families share, grief can misremember. He gestured toward Lena, who dabbed at one eye with the handkerchief that had never seen a day's work. He tried a sentence where my refusal at a door became a symptom. It did not survive the walk across the room. Harris did not rise again to argue feeling. He returned to the paper. He set a single page on the lectern with the transfer totals circled. He pointed 2 fingers steady at the place where Caleb's handwriting promised repayment, and then never returned to keep company with itself. The judge read quietly for a time that felt like the pause between inhale and exhale. When he looked up, he set the papers in a stack square enough to satisfy a person who values corners. This court finds, he said, voice even that Ms. Ellison provided significant financial support under circumstances establishing expectation of repayment and respect for property. He moved through the exhibits, transfers notes, the clip that showed a camera treating a house like a studio, the neighbor's testimony, and described them with the crisp language of a person who has seen this kind of shape before. He ordered Caleb Shore to repay $150,000 in scheduled installments secured by lien. He required Caleb and Lena to issue a public statement acknowledging false claims and to remove posts within a day. He wrote the words down where they could be read again by anyone who planned to forget them. Caleb's hand closed on the edge of counsel's table. The knuckles whitened and then let go. Lena stared at the floor the way people look at water when they realize a reflection is just a picture. Harris's hand found the top of mine for the briefest second, a contact that registered and then stepped away. The gavel's knock did not feel like thunder. It felt like a door settling into the frame it was built for. We left without turning to read faces. The hallway had the institutional smell of old stone. Harris talked softly about copies and timelines. The case number sat inked at the top of the order like a coordinate. I held the paper at the edges and felt its cool hold. Outside the square was full of noon. A gull skimmed the courthouse roofline and reset its course with a small tilt of wing. I stood still long enough for the light to learn the shape of my shoulders. Then I walked to the car and drove the road that knew how the cliff curved. Home received me with the obedience of good hinges. The lamp by the sofa clicked on cleanly and gave enough. I set the order in the drawer beneath the console bowl, the place where important things live between being used and being needed again. The drawer slid closed with the sound I recognized now as the house speaking my name back to me in its own voice. The afternoon's quiet had a different density. Across the hedge, Mrs. Callahan clipped a rose and held it up to the light to inspect where petals browned at the edge. She glanced over, not curious, not pitying, simply making sure I could see her in case seeing mattered. I lifted my hand. She lifted hers. We didn't add words. My phone lay face down on the table. I turned it over and saw the blank black that means a battery is still willing. Messages waited in their stacked rectangles like things standing in line at a counter, neighbors who had watched the convoy and wanted to know how to measure what they'd seen. Acquaintances who believed they already knew a scale. A former colleague who wrote just 2 words, "I'm here," without putting her understanding on it. I did not answer all of them. I did not answer most. I pressed the power button, then set the phone aside. The room's air moved through the vents and taught me how the house breathes when no one is trying to tune it. In the kitchen, a single glass sat upside down on the rack, drying to a clean circle. I lifted it when it was ready and set it in the cabinet with the others. The alignment pleased me more than I would have admitted last month. It pleased me now because nothing in it leaned where it didn't belong. Evening practiced its slow translation across the windows. I sat at the oak desk and opened the drawer where I kept a set of playing cards and a pen that never blobbed. On the first card, I wrote the date, not the case number. On the next line, I wrote my name letter by letter, making sure it was mine and not a version anyone else could edit. I did not write more. I placed the card under the magnet on the side of the file cabinet and watched the paper hold. The house listened without effort. The ocean worked the same problem it has held for centuries, 5 seconds at a time. The study clock stepped forward with a restraint I envied. I let the chair keep me upright without earning it. When the lamp clicked off, the room gave me back to the dark with no argument. The door's latch met the strike in that small kiss I had counted on the first day and the second. The sound found the right size again in my ear. The house and I agreed on its meaning without speaking. Morning brought a clear square light that made edges honest. The order from the court lay in the drawer where I'd left it. The house stood up around it, calm as furniture that knows its job. I made coffee and watched steam rise in a straight line, then bend and vanish. The phone on the table woke with a small pulse. Messages waited links to a clipped article about the hearing notes from people who had watched a short segment on the local station, a thread where a stranger had posted the judge's lines in a screenshot. I read none of it all the way through. I set the cup down, opened the app where my name looked like anyone else's, and typed 2 sentences without decoration. Kindness is not weakness. Boundaries are love. I pressed post, turned the screen face down, and let the room keep its shape. Across the hedge, Mrs. Callahan trimmed her roses. She glanced over and gave the smallest tilt of her hat. I answered with a hand raised, chest-high, palm out. The exchange landed where it needed to, then ended. By noon, the post had begun to travel in the low, steady way a tide moves under the surface. A former colleague shared it without commentary. A woman from the library wrote that the sentence felt like something she wanted on a slip of paper in her wallet. Names I didn't know left short notes without prying. Thank you, needed this. I see you. The accumulation didn't feel like noise the way other accumulations had. It felt like proof of water in the pipe when you turn a tap and it runs clear. The doorbell sounded that afternoon, one chime patient. When I opened it, a young man stood on the step with a paper-wrapped bundle of daisies and lavender held at his waist. "Aunt Nora," he said. "It's David. I hope I'm not intruding. I called first, but I didn't want to assume." He was my sister's grandson, grown from boy to man in the long gaps families learn to live with. The courtesy in his voice removed the space between us in the cleanest way I knew. "You're welcome," I said and stepped back. "Shoes off on the mat, please." He did it without flourish, setting his sneakers side by side and tucking them under the bench as if he'd rehearsed respect. The flowers smelled like cut grass and the faint sugar that lives in lavender. I found a vase, rinsed it, and watched clear water climb halfway. "It's beautiful here," he said, not like a buyer, like a guest who has noticed a room and wishes to leave it better. "I'm glad you made this." We sat at the kitchen table, the same wood that had held folders and the weight of names. He looked at the open windows, at the strip of blue beyond the glass, at the photograph of Victor on the mantel. "I remember him from one Christmas," David said quietly. "He let me keep the pocket knife after he showed me how to close it without danger." He smiled at the memory. "I've had it ever since." We spoke in a way that required neither defense nor performance. His work, his apartment 2 states away, his saving for a place with a porch. The last book he read and actually finished. When he looked around again, he didn't ask where anyone slept or whether the master had the best light. He asked if he could open the window an inch more. He asked if I took sugar. He asked if the neighbor's roses bloomed all summer or only in a burst and rest. People online said a lot, he admitted after a while. "I waited to hear from you or not. I figured silence is information too." He put his hands around the warm mug and kept them there. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you said no." I didn't answer with this speech. I nodded once and let the body receive what the mind already knew. We ate a late lunch like ordinary relatives. He washed his plate and left it in the rack to dry. When he stood to go, he didn't ask when he could come back. He asked if he might call to ask. The shape of the request was the gift. "Yes," I said, "you may." After he left the house, kept the fragrance of lavender and a younger man's soap that hadn't tried to be expensive. I placed the flowers on the mantel beside Victor. The frame caught a narrow bar of light and held it long enough for me to see the glass glow. I straightened the picture by a hair, felt the small rightness click into place, and sat. Toward evening, the post gathered a kind of quiet inertia. A counselor I once met at a literacy fundraiser wrote that clients had quoted the sentence aloud in group. Under one share, a man apologized to an unnamed elder he referred to only as my mother. I did not put myself inside those scenes. I let the sentences do their own travel. The ocean held steady below the bluff, exhaling at even intervals. The house learned the sound and matched it. I opened the sliders and let the air write itself through the rooms. On the deck, the wood still wore a pale stripe where sunlight had dried it more than rain ever could. I brought a blanket out and set it over my knees. The first star stitched itself into the dark above the waterline. I lifted my glass, not a ceremony, just the movement a hand makes when it remembers itself, and turned the photograph on the side table so Victor faced the horizon the same way I did. The sea rolled and broke and arranged itself again. A gull traced the last silver seam of daylight before choosing a darker path. I listened until the sources of sound, simplified water wind through grass, the slow click of a cooling pipe somewhere under the floor. When the chill reached my shoulders, I went inside and closed the sliders. The latch made that small, certain sound I had learned by heart. In the hall, the rug was clean. In the sink, the single glass had dried to a clear circle. I placed it with the other's rim-aligned, weight distributed. The lamp near the sofa turned off with a touch. The house accepted dark without resistance. In the bedroom, I pressed 2 fingers to the top edge of Victor's frame and felt the glass cool under my hand. The cedar in the dresser had kept its faint sweetness. I drew the curtains halfway enough to let the ocean's rhythm thread the room and leave again 5 seconds at a time. The bed held the shape I had given it in the morning. I slid under, set my palms flat to either side, and let breath organize itself. The quiet did not demand anything, it carried. The house, the sea, the night each kept its place. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.